Welcome back to the First Gnostic Church of Christ. This is video 2, the read and commentary of the Hypostasis of the Archons. In our last video, we discussed Samiel's sin, which is the Demiurge's proclamation that he is God and there is no other but him, meaning that he is the one and only God that is above all others and is in fact the only God. This was due to his ignorance and his arrogancy that he made such a proclamation, and it was in fact a lie. Christ himself had said, "We are all God." So then, in his envy, his pride, his greed, his arrogance, and his ignorance, he took upon himself to lord over everyone, and thus was known from that point forward as Lord God. Now on this planet Earth, we call him Jehovah, which essentially is the four elements of astral theology, fire, earth, air, and water, that are being moved by the powers of the Demiurge. This is one face of the Demiurge, the Jehovah God, that rules over the nation of Israel, and through the nation of Israel, then rules over the rest of humanity. Before we begin the next section, entitled The Creation of Adam and Eve, I want to review a couple of comments from our last video. Now I'm taking this from video 1, Hypostasis of the Archons, the Purpose of Archons. And Drew Riggs writes, principalities as stated in the canon pretty much means the same as archon, which I am sure you know. So this is great, Drew, for pointing this out. And he's referring specifically to a verse found in Ephesians chapter 6, starting at verse 10. Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. If we look at the Greek understanding of chapter 6, verse 12, you see here where the word rulers is arches, which is derived from the same word that we get the word archons. So rulers being arches here is referring to those principalities on high. The other significant part of this verse that I wanted to point out is where the writer talks about cosmokratoris, which means cosmic powers. Cosmic powers meaning everything that is earth and beyond. So this is powers, authorities, rulers that have the ability to rule over all of the cosmos, and they are of darkness, and they are against the spiritual beings of the Christ within all of us, known as the pneumatic beings. Remember, in Gnosticism there are three types of beings: the hylic, the psychic, and the pneumatic. And we have those that are known as the forces that are called the pneumatica. It says against the cosmic forces of the darkness, against the spiritual. So they work against the pneumatic. We wrestle against dark forces of evil in the heavenly realms. So I thought that was important to point out, that when we look at the verses written in Ephesians, when the writer, which presumably was Apostle Paul, writes about principalities, he's referring to the archons. Another comment pointed out the importance of the last section of the paragraph under Samiel's sin, or the messenger of that book talks about the archons having no spirit. As David Stanley points out, I think the most revealing part of the story so far is the phrase, quote, since beings that merely have soul cannot lay hold of those that have spirit, unquote. And this is a good place to segue into our next section, under the section titled The Creation of Adam and Eve, as when the archons, or the demiurge, went about to fashion the flesh human, he created flesh human in his image, meaning the flesh human had a body and a soul, but he had no spirit, for the demiurge had no spirit to give him. So we're going to find out how the human is able to take on a soul in this next section called The Creation of Adam and Eve. Let's continue our reading commentary of the Hypostasis of the Archons. Here it reads, this is the reason why incorruptibility looked down into the region. Now we're referring back to the previous section where incorruptibility, meaning the mother, father, the monad, looked down into the lower regions because Yodaboth, or Samael, also known as Saklos, proclaimed he was the only one, the only God. I am God, there is no other but me. And then he began to create the flesh human after the likeness of the image that he had seen, along with the other archons, of the perfect man and woman, which was the Christ and the Sophia, and tried to mock that particular creation, for it was lacking in himself. Essentially, he was looking to contain the spiritual nature that he himself lacked. And so incorruptible God saw this taking place and knew that when the demiurge goes about to create the flesh human, that human would be in bondage, for it would be as a zombie without a spirit. And so then, it is for this reason why incorruptibility looked down into this region. And this is where Sophia then visits this region. She resides between the pleroma, or in what's called the upper realms, above the heavens, where you have the demiurge, and this earth. She resides there until such time all have been saved or redeemed from this realm. So the incorruptible looks down, and just the very power of the incorruptibility looking down brought the Christ. Most of this second section, the Hypostasis of Archons, is taken from the secret book of John, and you'll recall much of this as we read through it. But it says, this is the reason why incorruptibility looked down into the region, so that by the Father's will, she, meaning Sophia, might bring all into union with the light. And remember, Sophia took it upon herself to correct her misunderstanding or her error in thinking when she tried to pursue the entirety of God. She wanted in that instance to embrace all of God, which would be impossible, as God is infinite. Despite her love and passion for God, it still brought about an error in thinking, and that error in thinking was the beginning of a new type of creation, which was the Yodaboth, or the half-god or half-lion snake entity that brought about truth as well as a lie. This is the beginning of the tree of good and evil, not the tree of knowledge of good and evil, but rather the tree of good and evil that we all partake of in this dualistic realm that we all reside in. Now, it's significant to point out this understanding of the soul and the spirit, for the soul is the bridgeway between the body and the spirit. The soul is the emotional component, the memory component of the flesh self. It is a reflection of the spiritual self, but it is not the spiritual self, merely a reflection of the spiritual self. Now, we're going to find out that these beings called Archons, some consider to be angels, fallen aeons, which become archangels. Others believe that they may be aliens. But what we do understand is they have a beastly type of face. Some call them Therions, and others Babels or Babalons. And we'll understand the significance of this as we begin to understand Revelations when it talks about the beast and the Babalon, the whore. And these are consort to one another. The beast is the face of the Archons, and they have a body similar to we humans. The truth is, we have a body, flesh body, similar to the Archons, but our face is the face of the Christ and the Sophia, the male and the female. We do not take upon the face of the beast, which are the Archons, or the Therions, and the Babels, which are the Babalons. But here we continue, where it says, the reason why incorruptibility looked down into the region, so that by the Father's will, she, meaning Sophia, might bring all into union with the light. So she essentially took on the burden of redeeming humanity by bringing humanity her body for a type of offering or gift to humanity, which was the gift of faith. But through the Christ, her consort, man is able to find gnosis and become aware of the Sophia. Without the Christ, without true gnosis, one cannot understand the form of God the Father's will, which is the Sophia, the faith, the pistis Sophia. The rulers laid plans and said, and the rulers here again, the Archons, quote, "Come, let us create a human that would be soil from the earth," unquote. They modeled their creature as one wholly of the earth, meaning totally of the flesh. They took of the earth to create this man, which was in the image of the perfect man and woman, the perfect human that was created from the beginning, the spiritual human as intended from the beginning. Now at this point, these spiritual beings, these human beings, were still in the pleroma. The demiurge creates the flesh man and woman on earth And you'll see that eventually these spiritual beings get entrapped into these bodies that are created by the demiurge. The rulers have bodies that are both female and male, and faces that are the faces of beasts. They took some soil from the earth and modeled their man after the body and after the image of God that had appeared to them in the waters. And again, this part that is the image of God is the face of the human. We took on the image of the beast in body, but not in face. The face was after Sophia and the Christ. Now I'm going to take you over to Revelations, and this is Revelations 13:1, where it talks about, and I saw out of the sea a beast, which is a Therion, rising, having horns 10, and heads 7, and on the horns of it 10 diadems, and upon the heads of it names of blasphemy. And again, in Gnosticism, we consider the only blasphemy, the unforgivable sin, to be to not be true to oneself, to not find one's perfection, one's wholeness, that spiritual gnosis within, and to blossom forward. This is what's going to bring you the unforgivable sin and bring you back into the will of incarnation, reincarnation, you see. And it's the beast that is rising out of the sea that will attempt to keep you here. And later we'll talk about what are these horns of 10 and heads of 7. This is in much later videos as we finish the Gnostic text and then go into the canonical text. Remember that the demiurge has a head of a lion, which is ego, but also being fixated and prideful, and gave to it the dragon the power of him, and the throne of him, and the authority great. And again, I'm not going to cover all the details here, but what I want to get to is eventually you'll see in the same chapter, we talk about the dragon, talk about the beast, and we talk about Babalon. The one and only unforgivable sin is being mentioned many, many times in chapter 13, Revelation. And here you see in Wikipedia, Therion is the Greek word for beast, is a deity found in the mystical system of Thelema, which was established in 1904 with Aleister Crowley's writings in the Book of the Law. Therion's female counterpart is Babalon, another Thelemic deity. Therion, as the Thelemic personage, evolved from that of the beast from the Book of Revelations, whom Crowley identified himself with since childhood because his mother called him that name. Indeed, throughout his life, he occasionally referred himself as the Master Therion, or sometimes the Beast, 666. So the significance here really is understanding the counterpart to the beast is Babel, is confusion. That's what you want to understand. It's not an actual place. Babylon is not an actual place. Now, of course, we have Babylon in ancient Persia. But when we understand the word Babel as being talked about in Revelations, we understand it refers to the Tower of Babel. And we then understand Christ when he says that the God of the Old Testament, or the devil, is the God of confusion. Because Babel means a confused noise, typically that made by a number of voices. This is where we get a host of demons and angels, or Archons, fallen aeons, essentially, or fallen angels, from the pleroma into this realm, into the realm of the 7 realms, the lower realms. So it's this Tower of Babel that also brought about confusion among all the humans in their various ethnicities and groups that once spoke a common language, and then they were given a confused tongue, because the gods would not have humanity rise above this atmosphere, you see. And that's why we've yet to really go into space and maybe visit the moon once or twice. There are some theories around that there are aliens that, or archons, or beasts, or babels, that also can be considered as makers of confusion, that reside perhaps on the lunar surface or above the earth, under the earth, but they work among politicians, among priests, among celebrities, among all those that have the power and the voice to speak and divide and conquer the humans here on earth, and to keep us confounded and imprisoned and locked into what's called this garden called earth, so that we may till the soil, but more significantly, so that we may bring forth labor and mine precious minerals. And this becomes very clear to us when we read chapter 1 of Genesis, when it talks about where the Garden of Eden is, and it mentions the various types of minerals. One river on the east, another on the west, another to the south. And as these rivers are mentioned, they also mentioned what is the significant mineral that is in that part of the garden. And so when we talk about Genesis, we understand the Lord God made man because there was no one to till the soil. You see, in other words, there was no one to bring about the fruits to feed the gods, and there was no one to mine the minerals that these gods wanted. Now, so these gods have a type of body, as you saw earlier. In fact, human's body is in the image of these Archons, or these beasts, but yet our faces are different from these beasts. Call them whatever you like, whether they be fallen angels, demons, aliens. Essentially, they all derive from the same purpose, which is to rule over humanity, confuse them, and keep them confounded and imprisoned. And ultimately, they do this through ignorance, which is the opposite of gnosis. Ignorance of self and one's power that resides in each of us, which is that we are all sons and daughters of God. We are perfectly created from the beginning, and the Father, pronoia, which is to conspire to do good and to work in our favor, is within all of us, and is the very thing, the gnosis, and the wisdom of Sophia that will set us free from this bondage. Now continuing, the rulers have bodies that are both female and male, and faces that are the faces of beasts. They took some soil from the earth and modeled their man, after their body and after the image of God that had appeared to them in the waters. They said, "Come, let us lay hold of it by means of that form that we have modeled, so that it may see its male partner, and we may seize it with the form that we have modeled." So what is being referred to here is the Archons go about, along with the Demiurge, to bring about the female form, so that the female form may captivate the male partner, you see. And it says, not understanding the partner of God, meaning the female partner of God, which is Sophia incarnate, because of their powerlessness, meaning their ignorance. And he breathed into his face, meaning the man, and the man came to have a soul, and remained on the ground many days, but they could not make him rise because of their ignorance, their powerlessness. Like storm winds, they persisted in blowing, that they might try to capture that image which had appeared to them in the waters, and they did not know the identity of its power. So they were confounded. They couldn't understand why they couldn't make this particular being that they had formed from the dust of the earth come alive. Now all these events came to pass by the will of the Father of all. So the God in the heavens, the Mother Father, saw all of this and knew that it was to be, just as intended from the beginning. Afterward, the Spirit saw the man of soil on the ground, the Spirit here being the Sophia and the Christ. The Spirit came forth from the adamantine land. Now this is important, the adamantine. This word is the Middle English word adamantine. Adamantine, made of or having the quality of adamant, rigidly firm, unyielding. Adamantine, resembling the diamond in hardness or luster, unshakable or insistent, especially in maintaining a position or opinion. Adamant, unyielding, insistent on doing things its own way. So what we have here is that this being that the Demiurge goes about to try to fashion from the land held within it a rebellious nature. It would not be able to be defeated. It was unyielding. It was as hard as a diamond and yet shined like a diamond. And so even in the very essence of the substantial world, the material world, within it was the wisdom of Sophia. See, from the very beginning, even prior to the Demiurge and its Archons going about to fashion Adam and Eve, they were already defeated, because the very substance from which they brought about the Adam already held within it God. Essentially reckless and ignorance on their behalf, but also it was futile. But nonetheless, the Spirit came forth from the adamantine land. You see, it was already in the land. It descended and came to dwell in him, the spiritual self. The Spirit came to dwell within Adam, and that man became a living soul. And the Spirit called his name Adam, named after adamantine, since he was found moving upon the ground. So he's named after the earth, the substance of earth. That's why he was called Adam. A voice came forth from incorruptibility for the assistance of Adam, and this is Sophia and Christ. The rulers gathered together all the animals of the earth and all the birds of heaven and brought them in to Adam to see what Adam would call them. Why? Because the Demiurge and his minions did not have wisdom, did not have knowledge. They were unable to define the essence of each of these beings because they did not create these beings. You see, God the Father and Mother brought these beings about. This one being called Adam was of the genetic stock of the Hebrew stock that was specifically made to rule over humanity, over the Gentiles. But of course you'll see that even this was not going to work. And so they brought all the animals and the birds before Adam to see what he would call them, and he might give a name to each of the birds and all the beasts. So even the demiurge didn't name these various animals. The rulers took Adam and put him in the garden. Now the garden here is significant because essentially the garden represents this part of earth that it's essentially an imprisonment of humanity. This is what the garden represents symbolically, that he might cultivate it. Now notice that the man was made to cultivate, in other words, to do labor. But if you notice even nature itself, it already provides for us everything. Man needs to do no labor. He merely needs to walk up to a tree and pluck a fruit from the tree, and to take fish from the water, or to drink water from the river. This is all freely given from the God, from the Father, from the beginning. But the demiurge wants to entrap the Adam. So he brings about this understanding of culture, to cultivate the man, meaning to lure him or persuade him, to manipulate him through time to his bidding, that he might cultivate it and keep watch over it. You see, he's not free. They are going to keep an eye on him like Big Brother. Then they issued a command to him. Now they're going to lord over him. They're going to issue commands to this Adam, and saying, "From every tree in the garden shall you eat, but from the tree of knowledge of good and evil don't eat nor touch it. For the day you eat from it, you will surely die," unquote. Now, this is significant because this is the beginning of the seed of rebellion within this adamantine being, because the Spirit of God dwelled. And you see, from the beginning, man was free to do everything. There was no limitations. This is what power is, you see. No need to control anything because there are no limitations. And the Adam within knew, the spirit within, the gnosis within, even though it may have been dormant, knew something about this was incomplete and flawed. And so this command went against the very fiber and very nature of man and woman. Furthermore, notice how, if you look at video number 1, this verse here, or this sentence, talks about from every tree in the garden shall you eat, meaning these trees, because you see, the demiurge and his minions talks about wanting to cultivate this Adam, but yet these trees already are in the garden. So what are they trying to cultivate? They're not really trying to cultivate the ground. They're trying to cultivate the man. See, it says, so that he might cultivate it, meaning he, meaning the demiurge and its rulers, might cultivate it, meaning man. This is what they were attempting to do. Man became like a produce that this Archon would feed off of and would keep watch over it, much in the way that we would have cattle, you see. And this garden represents the fence. And then the cattleman, along with its sheepdog, would put out commands and keep it away from anything that might free it. So it wants to keep it blocked into this fenced area. So these trees already existed, you see. It wasn't that the demiurge and the minions were interested in man cultivating these trees or these fruits that were in the garden, for these trees already existed. That's why he issued the command, from every tree in the garden shall you eat, but from the tree of knowledge of good and evil don't eat nor touch it. In other words, these trees were not did not result from the demiurge and the archons, but resulted from the emanation of the true Mother Father, the body of Sophia. And this is the knowledge that we will partake of, the knowledge of good and evil. That tree is the body of Sophia and Christ. For the day you eat from it, you shall surely die. And let's see if this is actually true. They said to this man, but they did not understand what they said. Rather, by the Father's will, they said this in such a way that he might in fact eat. And for the true Father and Mother knew that man was free. And this kind of trying to limit the man that was rightfully free, seek you the truth, and you shall be set free. For man held truth within him, and this was a lie, the demiurge told. And the lie was that if you eat of that tree, that you will surely die. When in fact, eating of the tree was the beginning of eternal life. Rather, by the Father's will, they said this in such a way that he might in fact eat, because the true Father and Mother knew that man had a rebellious nature, and that Adam might not regard them as would a man of an exclusively material nature. So man would then begin to understand they were not just a flesh being, but in fact was a spiritual being. We are not flesh beings with a spirit. but we are spiritual beings that happen to be residing in a flesh body. That is very, very important for you to understand. It is the very beginning of your pathway to full understanding and growth in gnosis. And it continues, the rulers took counsel with one another and said, you see, there are many of them, and they're frightened, this little man. Come, let us cause a deep sleep to fall on Adam, because they see Adam as coming to realization of his power. So they want to put him asleep. Their first trick didn't work. They created a woman. They wanted to sidetrack him. It didn't work. You see, the woman that came to Adam, this first woman was, some say Lilith, others say it was Sophia, embodied in a type of transfiguration. They wanted to use that to lure Adam, but it didn't work. And so they said, well then, let's put him asleep and let's create a flesh partner to Adam so that he might be enthralled through this ignorance, meaning, in other words, the material self. Material substance holds a low density of knowledge within it. It's like the frequency is majorly lowered down. So there's very little truth within it. It's mostly emptiness. And so this is what they did. They put him asleep, meaning they put him into ignorance. And he slept. And that means he began to forget. Now, the deep sleep that they had caused to fall on him, and he slept, is ignorance. They opened his side, which was like a living woman. Now, this is all symbolic. The opening of the side here refers to the heart. You see, it's on the left side is the heart of man, the human. And so they took love out of man and they formed the woman. They separated, they divided the full man, the full being, into a man and a woman. And the only way the man could continue to be was through intercourse. In other words, to know one another. Another way of saying this is the right and left side of the brain. So it's one side that was taken. And I don't remember which one it is. I know that one side is more creative and the other is more logical. But one side of it, presumably the creative part, was taken away from Adam. And they built up his side with some flesh in place of her. And Adam came to be only with soul. So he lost his spirit. He was unable to emanate or create. He would only be able to do this with his counterpart, the woman part, the creative part, through a type of intercourse. And this would only be done through lust, which was the original envy, along with pride, were the original machinization of the demiurge. For they envied what the true father and mother had brought about from the beginning, when they saw it up on the waters above them, because they could not lay hold of it, and so they lust after it. So they lust after it, and in so dividing the man Adam, they created lust. The woman of spirit came to him and spoke with him, saying, Rise, Adam. And when he saw her, he said, It is you who have given me life. Now again, this is, some will say this is Sophia, others will say it's Lilith, others will say no, it's Eve. And ultimately it doesn't matter so much as understanding there are different levels of the same female. There's the spiritual, soul, and flesh female, just as there are the spiritual, soul, and flesh male. But the spiritual self is what the wisdom is, the female aspect, the feminine aspect that we're lacking in this culture today. And we have since the beginning. This is where the patriarchy came about, and the genetic code where man was supposed to be the one who rules the roost, and everything is named after the man. Adam, Cain and Abel, so forth and so on. That was more important. You see, the women weren't listed in the lineage. The demiurge went about to do this purposely, to put man into a sleep, so he would not remember. And remember what I said in the last video when we talked about what lust is. Lust essentially is wanting something that you're constantly chasing after, but you'll never be able to attain. This is what the demiurge did. He continually put knowledge and the power of emanation, the power of the creative self, out of reach of humanity. And this was knowledge. Knowledge essentially is the knowledge of tree of good and evil, meaning when you understand both sides, you have a type of intercourse. You take on the fullness of understanding, or gnosis. Then you no longer have lust, and lust is then slayed, essentially. So the woman of spirit came to him and spoke with him, saying, Rise, Adam, meaning get off of your knees. And of course in the church, they want to put you on your knees. And when he saw her, he said, It is you who have given me life. You will be called Mother of the Living, for she is my mother. She is the physician and the woman, and she has given birth. This means not a physical birth, but a spiritual birth, because in her he saw truth. He saw his counterpart, his consort, his counterweight, the other part of him, which is what the demiurge wants to call the evil part of the knowledge of good and evil. When in chapter 1, we talked about God created both light and darkness, and they were both good. The demiurge would take light and darkness and call one good and the other evil. This section is essentially telling you the demiurge knew that man would have to be split because he was too powerful, and part of him would have to go into a type of sleep, and he would cause them constantly to lust after one another and to be distracted, so they would never be able to find peace within themselves and wholeness. This is really what this section is telling you. And he did this by cultivating the man and putting him to sleep and making commands over him and imprisoning him in a garden. Now, a lot of people want to say that the Garden of Eden is a wonderful place. This is the way the pastors and preachers will teach you in the church, when in fact it was a horrendous place. It was a type of hell. It was a prison. It's much like the cattle that are eating from the open pasture, fenced in. They don't know they're going to slaughter. You see, this is what this is talking about. It's not this lovely, wonderful place. In fact, the very trees, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil, were forbidden. The very things that would bring about overcoming death and waking up to one's wholeness and one's fullness. So this entire story of Adam and Eve, from the very first day you were born till today and thousands of years back, has been turned 180 on its head. 180 to keep you from knowing the truth, so you may remain in the dark and imprisoned this planet, a type of prison planet. So this is what I want to share with you today. This is this section, video 2, and we'll pick up on video 3 in the next section called Adam and Eve in the Garden. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again soon. Bye.